Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. There are reports that most states in Nigeria are not sleeping easy over the decision of the federal government to recoup the bailout funds extended to them earlier in the life of the Buhari administration. This development continues to put on the front burner the need for component states of the Federation to begin to diversify their revenue generation base. For a wider conversation on this, we're now being joined by Rotimi Oyekan, a former Lagos State Commissioner for Finance. Welcome to the program. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, good to have you on the morning show. Well, Tundu already introduced this subject. Many states of the Federation are complaining about, funds and how to generate funds, how to diversify the economy. But one major issue that came up recently was the plan to take another look by the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation Commission to take another look at the revenue share formula. What will you recommend? Do you think that if that is reviewed, there is merit in it, that it will help the states and the local councils who are asking for a larger share of revenue from the federal purse? Or these states and local governments should look inwards, to use a familiar phrase?
Well, thank you very much. It's expedient for the revenue formula to be reviewed in favor of the states. But perhaps more importantly, it is expedient right now at the history of the country, economic history of Nigeria, for us to take a holistic look at what we call the fiscal standards of the country. Fiscal standards is a broad terminology that refers to those parameters of economic activity that are determined by the executive arm of government at different tiers that they exist. It will be pleasing to note that there are certain aspects of those standards that the government is presently looking at, perhaps as a matter of expediency rather than as a matter of purpose. If you know what I mean, there's a need for us to have an all-encompassing fiscal plan for Nigeria spanning over 15, 20, 25 years. If you observe, there is an upward increase in crime rates in Nigeria across different levels and different parts of the country. This is due to persistent levels of unemployment and underemployment, which is a major fiscal indicator of well-being of a community or a country or a state. Now, what is government doing about it? The knee-jerk response has been to increase the spending and mobilization in the security expenditure. Where is this money going to come from? It's going to come from the center. It will put pressure on the fiscal standards of the government, federal government in terms of security votes and all those things. But could we take a different look and look at a different approach? Why don't we look at the opportunity to now plan to manage unemployment for what it is, to look at the wage level and look at what is a sustainable wage? There is an attempt to review the minimum wage to 30,000 or thereabout, but those are still baby steps, if you like, in looking at what is the sustainable living wage level. Why shouldn't civil servants have homes of their own? How do we ensure that people have disposable income to spend? Look at it from a different perspective. The Nigerian GDP is a sizable amount in trillions of naira. What is the percentage of government budget, aggregate budget spend over the GDP? How much impact can it make on the people? So the problem we're dealing with is beyond the issue of the sustainability of the states. It is beyond the issue of review of revenue allocation formula. It requires a more deep-rooted surgery of our fiscal standards, economic planning, and of course our financing.
I don't think you'll get a lot of argument on that, sir. We're trying to apply a Band-Aid where surgery is needed. But I want to ask you, why is Lagos exempt? Because the news is that this month, the federal government is going to begin to recoup its bailout funds. These funds were given initially to 19 states and then 35 states, with only Lagos State being able to pay salaries. These funds were not given to boost infrastructure, it was to pay salaries. Even the barest minimum was not possible without federal government intervention. What did Lagos State do differently, and how can that be applied all around the country?
Lagos State is an outlier. It's not fair for you to continue to flog the issue of the success of Lagos State. And let me expatiate a bit. One thing that is clear, a basic tendency in world reality, is rural-urban migration. Lagos State has continuously benefited and suffered from this reality over the years. The obvious benefit has been the fact that you have more educated and resourceful people residing in that node of the country. It is not just Lagos anymore, it's expanding towards Ogun State and perhaps some other states in the southwest. If you observe, the Inspector General of Police indicated that the crime rate in this area is the minimum amongst other regions of the country. That should tell you certain things about the kind of people that reside there and the opportunities that brings to them. Lagos State has continued to implement progressive economic policies since the turn of the democratic experiment that we have now. Those policies have been consolidated within the period of 2007 to 2014 by astute management of resources and aggressive spend on transportation and other economic infrastructure. Now, Lagos can do that because it has the base, the tax base, to expand. However, the period that I mentioned witnessed aggressive spend on infrastructure, which increased the compliance of people towards paying their taxes at a level beyond what that state had seen before now. And that trend had continued even in the last 4 years of the last administration. It is expected to continue, despite all the issues that we're hearing has happened. So, in terms of economic transition, Lagos State has already crossed the threshold. Other states will now have to find the means and ways. They must now begin to plan and employ prudent utilization of their resources to be able to move towards a trajectory where they can also cross that threshold. Let us bear in mind that that critical journey cannot be the same for all the states. So if the federal government today is saying that, yes, I gave you a bailout 36 months, how many years ago, come and start paying back, it belies the issue. It doesn't solve the problem. Because even if those states begin to pay, is either they're going to take loans or they're going to deprive themselves of money that they could use to solve other economic activities. It is time for the states and the government to sit down and look at a more feasible and holistic plan towards moving the states from their present state of economic activity to sustainable transitions.
Well, I mean, you've made quite a number of interesting points, and you have said, you know, the states should look for ways and means for more prudent utilization of resources. But what we have seen is that in many of the states, the governors talk about IGR, you know, internally generated revenue. And the approach usually is to create all kinds of multiple taxes and put more burden and pressure on the people of the state who, in any case, are, you know, generally poor. What kind of recommendations will you make with regard to, you know, diversifying the revenue base beyond just punitive, well, in quotes, taxation?
Well, this is my exact point. Taxation is one key variable in array of economic standards that I spoke about. It is improbable for any government to expect high compliance on their tax policy if there is high crime rate, there is high unemployment, and there are no opportunities. Perhaps it is expedient for me to point to the fact that fiscal standards refers to how do we allocate the resources that are available in each state to different tiers of government. I mean, let me make an example. Today, if you look at the South-South states, Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, Rivers, Delta, these states have had the benefit of a more equitable utilization of their own resources for their economic development. Apart from the fact that they have a Niger Delta ministry, they also have NDDC, for which there are resources that goes into them. So aggregate resources that go into that region is a whole lot more than what you will find in other parts of the country. What I'm saying is we should ask ourselves, where are the mineral resources in Nigeria? Where are the forestry resources in Nigeria? Where are the agri resources in Nigeria? How do we begin to change the fiscal formula that in terms of taxation and share of revenues accruable from these resources to favor the states more such that they can now have an opportunity to lead that change that is required in the economic activity of each state. That's what I think the Ministry of Planning at the federal level, the planning functions at the state level, and perhaps at the regional level should be doing at this stage. The issue of repayment of loans, it's right, it doesn't cut it. You pay the loan, what happens? You are not able to provide for schools or health. Mind you, Nigeria has a challenge with poverty. There's a rapid movement in towards poverty by a large number of our people. What is required is a surgery. It's not a slap on the wrist or applying Panadol for a cancer issue.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that what is required is a surgery, but I'm looking for specific recommendations in terms of what the states can do, you know, to attract investment, to provide necessary infrastructure, to create an ease of doing business environment, you know, because some of these states, yes, they have potentials, but we do not see, you know, many of these governors, you know, expanding that potential. Instead, everybody is waiting for federal allocation at the end of the month, or they just resort to taxes. What are specific things that you would recommend?
Well, that time is gone for relying on resources from the federal. What I would want to kind of introduce to the states is utilization of, I don't know whether I should call it internal loans now, or a interesting product in debt solutions, which economies that find themselves with their back to the wall begin to tap on their savings and apply the liquidity that comes from there to the most viable economic activity. What do I mean by this? If you take a look at, for example, you looked at a state like Oyo State, for example. Capital is Ibadan. It's historically was the capital of the Southwest. If you took a kind of, if you looked at the physical assets.
Mr. Oyekan, we need to take a short break. We need to take a short commercial break. When we return, you know, you can continue with this, you know, contribution. We'll be right back. Just stay tuned. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And we've been having a conversation with Rotimi Oyekan, a former Lagos State Commissioner for Finance. Now, before we went on break, you were saying that, you know, the time for going cap in hand to Abuja is past. And you were citing the example of Oyo State and talking about how to diversify the revenue base for states. Hello, Mr. Oyekan, you are still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I started talking about Oyo State.
Yes.
It's still an urban center, a center where there is a lot of resources that have been, invested in that place over the years, over the course of Nigeria's political history. These resources, in terms of schools, in terms of hospitals, could be valued, and novel economic solutions could be utilized to refinance those values to allow the states more liquidity to spend on priority area based on a new economic plan that will endanger increased compliance on taxes. What am I saying? I'm not recommending a debt solution in isolation. It is within the context of a new economic plan for a state like Oyo. And I'm saying if you went to other states, either in the north or in the southeast, or indeed the middle belt, you will actually find a pathway where we can mobilize resources. Because people will not pay taxes unless they see that government is serious and there is impact on what government is doing. And I'm saying that as a benefit of experience. In Lagos State, when I was in office, which was a while back, we observed an unusual increase in compliance on taxes from July 2007, when we got into the office, to December of the same year. We found out that the IGR of the state rose from 7.5 billion naira, where we met it, to over 10 billion in a space of 4 or 5 months, because there was a perception that government is doing something right. So, first thing, the people of every state must feel that the government is the right government. 2, the government must be saying the right things. They must show the right plans and the right commitment. Then they can now introduce the right products, which will free resources and get a response in terms of tax compliance. This is aside from the need to engage the government in terms of who gets what in taxes. Yesterday, there was an approval by the Federal Economic Executive Council on an increase in our VAT rate from 5% to like 7.5% or thereabout. Now, that's value-added tax, and is a contentious decision as to who gets what, where is it generated from, and all those things. The fact is this: that tax should be for the exclusive use of the state. It will help the states in freeing up resources, in getting the resources to begin to deal with their issues. And these are some of the things that Federal Revenue Mobilization and Allocation Fiscal Commission should begin to look at, and also perhaps the National Assembly and the Federal Executive Council. But I believe that is just one easy thing that we can quickly do to begin to help the states. But people, in terms of experience, there will be no compliance if people don't feel that you have a government that is purposeful, that is result-driven, and can get the results.
Now, I'm going to present to you a fact. I hope you won't consider that flogging. Minister for Finance and Budget and National Planning has proposed a 9.78 billion naira budget for 2020, but said, quite alarmingly actually, that between 2020 and 2022 it's going to be fiscally challenging with regard to revenue generation and high personnel costs. So since you've been using a medical analogy this morning, what's your prescription at the federal level?
Well, at the federal level, I think a lot of good things have been done at the federal level. The Minister for Finance, prior to now, Kemi Adeosun, did some novel things in trimming the wage bill. But it can't stop at that. There's a need to look internally at providing the right kind of financing for different sectors of the economy. I mean, sectors like works, power, aviation, transportation, are critical sectors on the economic side. Sectors like health and education are also critical sectors on the social side. My recommendation is that this, in spite of all the issues we have, these sectors that I've identified requires novel financing at this stage. And power particularly, there's been substantial improvement in power in terms of capacity to generate. However, in terms of sustainability of power use, there are still challenges in metering areas and all those other things. So if you like, there are issues that we still need to deal with in that sector. But suffice to say that there is a lot, the need for novel financing in that sector is clear. So we cannot begin to look at the federal budget in isolation. We must look at it in terms of economic impact and how it can reduce the vices that we are seeing in our economy, unemployment and crime particularly. Some major economists use the term misery index, and then for me, something like how do we get the economy to be competitive? So we're coming from it. So what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't look at absolute numbers now. We should look at financing critical sectors that will carry us out of our misery in terms of poverty, improve employment, and then also in terms of efficiency of and competitiveness of our sectors by financing the critical sectors that I highlighted. And all this must be done within the context of a plan. In the immediate, we are going to see a lot of gaps in terms of revenue and budget because the tax base just doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, earlier on you talked about your experience as Commissioner for Finance in Lagos. And there was an issue that came out of Oyo State recently, the same Oyo State that you referred to. The governor, Seyi Makinde, the new governor, he said one of the things he has discovered is that it seems to be standard practice when contracts are awarded in Oyo State for the governor to take 50% of the cost of the contract up front. The commissioner in charge will take 30% up front. And then 10% of that 30% will go to the wife of the governor. And then another 10% will go to the contractor. And then only 10% will be set aside for the project. I mean, you were a Lagos State Commissioner for Finance, and you must have been meeting many of your colleagues at the time in Abuja, going for meetings. Is this really standard practice across Nigeria? What have you seen? What was your experience in relation to the award of contracts? Because it's very disturbing to hear that money is just shared and nothing is done.
Well, I want to quickly say that we have to be careful. We must be aware of what we accept as reality. I'm not exactly a stranger to Oyo State economic history, but I don't want to dwell into the realms of political talk, if you like. Please bear in mind that there's a new party in power in Oyo State, and there will be an effort to paint the activities of the previous government in the minds of the public in the dark. We cannot say that everything that has been done by that government is bad. Perhaps there could be rooms for improvement, just like we have in a lot of other states. And in terms of improvement, I made an argument, I spoke about procurement, fiscal standards. Compliance to high level of procurement standards is one of the key requirements in the delivery of economic goods by every government. There's no doubt that there's a need for improvement across the board of Nigeria in increasing the transparency in our procurement standard. And over the years, the federal government has taken the lead. There's a BPP office, which has changed the way contracts are procured. My belief is that a lot of states have actually, Lagos State, basically, we not only have in Lagos a procurement standard that is unsurpassed. And when we left government with a new procurement law where every contract is advertised, we set up a procurement office, a procurement agency based on a World Bank plan. I believe every state could do with this, such that there will be more transparency in what opportunities exist and how resources are allocated to it. And indeed, there are contractors that have had the privilege of interacting with, where if you pay 60% of the cost of a contract, they will deliver the contract and you can begin to phase out how you make the payment. But one thing I would recommend for all the state governments with this opportunity, if you award a contract, please make sure the contract is delivered and payment is made to contractors. What this does is that it endangers the confidence of the financing institutions in complementing your budget spend with credit, which will help the contractors deliver more. And perhaps this will help you be more impactful in the eyes of your voting populace.
Thank you, Mr. Oyekan. I wanted to quickly ask you, as we're running out of time, Nigeria signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We were late to the party, but we eventually got there. However, as of Tuesday, Zainab Ahmed was still referring to a nightmare situation that could occur. Oh, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I wanted to ask you about what those situations could be and how to prevent them. But thank you for joining us this morning, Rotimi Oyekan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.